Thank you, Mosaic Community. Thank you, MOAD. Thank you, California Independent Booksellers Alliance, for your tremendous support of Black authors, Black books, and of the intellectual enrichment of the Black community and therefore of our entire community. It is an honor to be here. Um, Malaika Tubbs is an extraordinary human, and I am so delighted to have received an early copy of her book, The Three Mothers. Everybody needs to buy this book today, as I know you will. It's wonderful to see so many people here on the call. I meant to thank and honor all of you who are here. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Once upon a time, Anna was an undergraduate at Stanford University, where I happened to be in the administration as the freshman dean. Within about 3 or 4 weeks of her freshman year, I got to know Anna. I started to get to know Anna because she was an elected leader of her dorm, and I worked with all the elected leaders of the freshman class. My, oh my, what a long time ago that was. I speak almost with the pride of a grandmother or an auntie, to see you um, in your magnificence and your glory, continuing on your path from undergraduate out into the world to become a graduate student, to fall in love, etc. And now to birth not only a son, but a book about, of all things, Black mothers. So let's begin with the assumption that not everybody watching is as familiar with you as some are. Tell us, Anna, who you are. Give us a bit of a sense of who you are and how you came to write this book, The Three Mothers. What led you to that point?
Definitely. And I first just want to thank you, Julie, who I now have stopped calling Dean Julie after years. It took me forever, but for being someone who we all admire and love so deeply. And the example that you showed us when we were freshmen and sophomores of following your own path and your own dream and your journey, even after having a career that was so successful and so wonderful that I think so many people to follow your passion, and you continue to inspire us today. So I thank you for that. I have your book right behind me. You're still teaching us every single day what it means to live your fullest, and I love that so much about you. To kick off this event with you, to kick off my book tour with you, is emotional to say the least, and I'm deeply deeply grateful. So in terms of this book, how I came to write it, I started it with my dissertation for my PhD. I started the program knowing that I wanted to join other scholars who are taking up the charge of correcting the erasure of Black women. Margaret Shetterly with her book Hidden Figures that inspired, this groundbreaking film. Isabel Wilkerson talking about the experiences of those who participated in the Great Migration, and how many of us didn't realize how all of these movements that were maybe specific to Black communities were affecting our entire country and shaping our entire nation. So I knew I was going to write about Black womanhood, but it was broad. There were so many different stories I could have written about. If you say you want to correct the erasure of Black womanhood, where do you begin? There are thousands and thousands, if not millions, of stories that we could share. And I also knew I had a limited amount of time in my PhD program. I was going to be there for 3 years as a Gates Cambridge scholar. I had already done my master's, so I had this limited amount of time. So I thought I could start with famous men. That could be my hook, that I could start somewhere with somebody who had so much already written about them. And I could look in the shadows and look in the margins and find those that were maybe hidden by this light that we really kind of shine when we focus just on this one unicorn figure. Who were we missing? What else could we say if we just expanded the lens or expanded that spotlight? And I became obsessed with the notion of motherhood, the woman before the man, not what we talk about when we're saying the woman, quote unquote, behind the man, which I hate that saying because likely they are not behind them. You're just choosing not to focus on them. They're probably right there. But to focus on the woman before the man was even thought of, even conceived. And as soon as I looked into all of these different mothers of different civil rights leaders and different important figures in our history, I really fell in love with these three in particular.
It's so beautiful. This book is very much an excavation of almost an archaeological excavation. You have taken what we think we know about these three men, and we haven't even named the men or the women, so we need to do that.
Yes.
But you've gone with your delicate tools of intellect and inquiry and analysis and carved away the extraneous bits and sort of revealed, almost like it's a sculpture you have sort of taken away, and now here we have these truths that were previously unknown or unseen. So let's name them. Let's name these three women and maybe dive a little bit more deeply into a brief, what the reader, give us a teaser of what the reader will discover, which they, will discover anew about these three women.
Yeah. So Alberta King, Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother, Louise Little, Malcolm Little, who then became Malcolm X's mother, and Bertus Baldwin, James Baldwin's mother. These are the three women at the center of my work whose names everybody needs to know. And that's really what the book is arguing. One of the largest parts and kind of center pieces of the book is how it changes what we thought we knew, like you mentioned. With all three of these men, and it's not at all to say that they need to be kind of, put aside. I 100% love these men and what they did for our country, what they did for our world. But we get to appreciate them even more when we know how they came to be who they are. And these three cases in particular, their mothers were so obviously, their prime inspirations, not only for why they wanted to succeed in life, not only for why they wanted to make things better for their own family members and their communities, but the different ways in which they felt they could achieve that. And so a couple of different teasers I can give here. I'm not great at those, so I can go on and on about these women. So I'll try to keep it succinct. But Alberta King was raised by two parents who believed in the importance of faith and social justice combined, that you could not have faith if you weren't also making sure that people's needs were met, that justice was being accomplished, that you had to make sense of the world as we knew it and not only focus on, what God could do for us, that God was providing inspiration for us to change the world as we knew it. And they all believed in these nonviolent ways of doing so. Her parents participated in boycotts. They were, some of the first members of the NAACP. They led boycotts to make sure that there was a public Black high school in Atlanta, the first public Black high school. So this is where Alberta King is raised. And these are the lessons in which she's embedded that she simply passes on to her kids. She puts her own spin on them. She evolves them with her own education. She was extremely educated. When she met her husband, he was considered illiterate and she already had a college degree. She tutors him through his own path. So there's so much more I could say about Alberta, but truly without her family and what they stood for, Martin Luther King Jr. really doesn't make much sense all on his own. And then when we think about Malcolm X, Louise Little and her husband were these radical Marcus Garvey Pan-Africanist activists. They believed in Black independence, the importance of, self-sufficiency for the Black community and independence from white America if they weren't going to accept us as we were, that it wasn't about assimilating. And if that doesn't sound familiar, then you don't know Malcolm X all that well. He then translates so much of what they are talking about with Marcus Garvey and goes on to become a leader, as we know, of the Nation of Islam. And then Bertus Baldwin, I love her story so much, all three women, but especially with her, she comes from the most humble of upbringings. She loses her mother at an incredibly young age. It's possible that her mom actually died in childbirth, but I can't confirm that. But she starts to realize that the only thing she can really hold on to in life is her own sense of peace, the importance she saw in love, the importance she saw in acceptance of all people, no matter how hard things could get, to never hold on to any kind of hatred, any kind of remorse, but to move forward with love and hope and light. And the way that she chose to communicate this to her own family members was through her letters and through her writing. Everybody who knew her said that she was an incredible writer. And so then we look at James Baldwin, who again takes this message of hope and light. And in some ways, sometimes he has this, more avenging way of talking about it. He has this righteous anger in his writing. So it's not that they're exactly the same as their mothers, but he inherits her desire to write and to help the world see things differently through his prose and through his language. So those are, again, just teasers. The book is filled with these direct connections that help us to better appreciate not only these three men, but where we are today and how we connect to the women as well.
You know, what I'm struck by is the things you've just named about Alberta, Louise, and Bertus somehow seem to comprise this lovely description of the salient elements of the African American diaspora, who we are as people in this moment, who we have historically been: faith, social justice, liberation, self sufficiency, humility, love, peace, language, writing, um, prose. It's somehow you sort of hit upon these three foundational people. Obviously, there were many others, and yet somehow these three do encompass pillars somehow supporting the progress that would come.
Definitely.
You know, I had a chance to read an early copy and blurb it, so which was an honor. And I believe in my
you
blurb.
again for that.
Thank you for asking me. No, it's an honor to be asked. I call this a love letter to these women, and you know, a love letter perhaps to Black women, for who Black women are in the lives of their offspring, who so often go unheralded and unsung. Why do you suppose, as you were excavating, as you were at Cambridge in England, learning more and more about these famous men and their mothers, was there any kind of battle with the documents, with the history, with the prior interpretations, with your faculty? Was there any proving you had to do either within yourself or with your faculty or other scholars about the relevance or legitimacy of the various facts you were discovering about these women?
That is a question that I could answer on so many different levels. But I will say I was super fortunate, one, to have the support of the Gates Cambridge Scholarship that was all about how you were going to use your academics to make a change in the world, which honestly is not super common in academia. Quite often you have to say, I'm dedicated to a life of the mind, and I don't necessarily want to do something out in the world. You have to kind of, you know, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it wasn't something that I was motivated by. So I was deeply grateful by having a scholarship that believed that I could write and work on a project that was also relevant to today, and that I could have conversations that were currently happening in the news and in my own country, and et cetera. So I'm deeply grateful for that. I also had two incredible advisors, women of color, and there's very few of them at the University of Cambridge. There's very few of them in academia generally, but they believed in my idea from the very beginning. They said this was legitimate work, that the way I was going to write it in a kind of creative way. My dissertation and the book are quite different documents, but I still have always approached my academic work with this kind of creative writing lens in a way that it's inclusive and people would want to read it and it's enjoyable to read. And I've dealt with some issues with that throughout my academic career, but these two advisors of mine, Monica Moreno Figueroa and Arathi Shiprakash, were both so supportive of the way that I wanted to accomplish this. And I couldn't have really done it without their advocacy and them saying, you know, oh, even to their own colleagues, this is a legitimate project and we're going to learn from this. And so I've been supported by that. The parts that have been conflicting have been, who do you believe in historic research when you're going through all of these documents that have only kind of mentioned them as asterisks or kind of put them as footnotes, or, you know, have conflicting information with each other. And so much of what was already written about the women, that again was only these tiny pieces, was mostly written by men. And so the way that they present the women, you know, was just, I felt out of context. Quite often, if you did hear about Louise, all you knew was that she quote unquote went crazy. And that was all that they ever said about her. And so how am I going to go in there and take that quote when I feel that they were missing context, or that they didn't do her justice of actually learning what her story was? So that was really my challenge, was the information that was out there was so limited and so biased and so like through the male gaze, that I needed to correct that, while also paying attention to times when was I making too many assumptions about the positive stance of something that I was reading? Should I have been more, should I have had an eye of more scrutiny? So I constantly challenged myself to find the balance of finding more about their lives through the perspective and the body that I was living in as a Black woman who was also becoming a Black mother. And there was nothing necessarily wrong with me now providing this perspective in the shoes that I was standing in.
I'm so glad you were supported by those two particular mentors. We all need mentors. We're all fortunate when we have mentors, and we should all strive to be mentors of people who are coming up on the path behind us. Let's go to the craft of this thing, because this beautiful book you have written, Three Mothers, because I found myself wondering, not having kept close enough attention on what you were actually doing in your PhD program. I found myself going, is she in a history program? Is she in a sociology program? Is she in a literature program? I assumed it was literature because your book is so exquisitely written. So you've said, obviously this is for your PhD, and there's something about academic writing that can feel so inaccessible. This book, y'all, is not academic writing. It is deeply literary. It is exquisite, but whereas academic writing may feel inaccessible, laden with footnotes, and what are they actually trying to say? This is a book that reads like a novel in the beauty of its prose, yet it is about real life folk. It is historical. It seems like sociology in some places. It's this genre mashup. You even throw in some personal narrative. You even go there as a woman, and you open the book with this. I'm not going to give it away. I want you to tell it, okay? But you have woven your own narrative as a Black woman, mother of a Black son, into this book. And let's not forget, your partner in life is a well-known public figure, the mayor of Stockton, California. And I found myself going, wow, look at these ripples. Look at how in the present moment, Anna is interrogating what it might mean to mother a child who will go out in the world and do something. And will she be overlooked as a foundational figure? Is that worry going through your head? So set this up. Tell everybody how the book opens, and then go to this place of your own curiosity about, the stirrings within you that may make you long not to be overlooked the way Alberta and Louise and Bertus for so long were.
Thank you so much for that question and the opportunity to speak to my own personal experiences. Before I start writing anything, I always sit down and think about my goals for what I want to accomplish with that writing. Why does it matter? What do I see at the end happening? So I had a lot of goals for this project. One was to celebrate Black women, like I mentioned. The other was to be fully honest and to be vulnerable in the writing, because a goal was to show how their lives connected to our lives. So much of Black feminist writing and study is about not only talking about Black women, but about saving Black women's lives that are currently being lived. And we talk about this in the book, Some of Us Are Brave. And I knew I was going to have to be honest and kind of be raw with my own emotions. And I could do that in the book, not in the same way that I could do in the dissertation. So when I started writing it, I said, you know what? This is a book about motherhood. Let me talk about the moment when I realized I was going to become a mother. What else can I start with? That was the moment when all your feelings come to you, where, you're kind of like bombarded with the emotions of happiness and also worry and anxiety and everything that comes with this incredible, beautiful moment. So the book starts with me realizing that my period was late. And I also have a general notion in my mind that more women should talk about their periods more openly. Like periods are like what make the world go round. And we have so much stigma for no reason around something that's so natural and normal. And so I was like, this is, my audience is going to get to know me from the beginning. I am like proud of being a woman, proud of being a Black woman. And this is the day that I found out I was going to have a baby, or that I was pregnant. But it also hit me right away, like I said earlier, the worry that came with it. Again, as a Black feminist scholar, I'm well aware of how dangerous it can be to have a baby in the United States if you're a Black woman, regardless of me having, getting my PhD at the University of Cambridge or having my undergraduate degree from Stanford, regardless of my access to money or some of the best healthcare systems. I was going to be looked at differently as a Black woman going every single time into the hospital, especially on the day that I would go in for my labor. We saw it with Serena Williams, Beyonce. It doesn't even matter how famous you are. You're more likely to lose your life as a Black woman in America if you're pregnant, and you're more likely to lose your child. So it also gave me this deep connection to the three women's lives, even more personally. I started writing the book before I was expecting my son. But I also knew that going through the rest of the writing, I now had this connection as my body was transforming and I was getting to know that I was going to be a mother just like these three women. What I could gain from their stories of bravery, persistence, but also honesty and vulnerability, that they were these incredible women who continued to persist no matter what, but that wasn't the lesson they necessarily wanted me to leave with from their lives. It wasn't to say, wow, look how strong these Black women are. And how often do we hear that? You get through everything, and wow, you carry the world on your shoulders, and that's so great. That is so antiquated. Like, we need to stop celebrating Black women for that and focus on their humanity. Focus on how we can make our lives easier today based off of what we can learn from the past, and to stop repeating the mistakes that make living in the United States as a Black woman so difficult. And that's kind of where the book ends, is talking about how their lives relate to us currently. And I come back and talk about my personal experiences yet again, because of, again, like you mentioned, that my husband has had the spotlight on him. I, from the age of 19, have been someone's political partner. And at some point I will write a book about that, because I have like crazy experiences to talk about from that. But what it meant for me to be this young Black woman, I have this high voice. People might perceive me as attractive. There was, in so many people's minds, no way that I had intellect of my own, that I achieved things on my own. I was constantly overlooked. Questions that I was asked only had to do with clothes I was wearing. It was such an insane experience for me that became heightened when my son was born. People would go directly to Michael and say, congratulations on the birth of your son, and ignore me as I was not there. And I'm somebody who's very outspoken. I have no problem responding. So I would say, wow, I wasn't aware that Michael had the capability of birthing a child. But congratulations, Michael. Like, that's great for you. Because it's time that we start correcting these conversations. Ridiculous. And what I did learn from Alberta Burtis and Louise is, you live your truth, and through that, you start to transform realities around you, to see the world through your eyes. So they're incredibly inspiring. That was a long, long answer, but hopefully it touched on all the different beautiful points you brought up.
It was a wonderful answer. I want to say beautiful, but I don't want to reinforce the stereotype that you're beautiful and that's all that matters. So I'm trying to use beautiful. I'm using language like exquisite and wonderful, which is about your work. I really did feel empathy for you, and not just, I think, because I'm your former dean. As a reader, I felt that it's a very subtle thread through the book. The book is not about you. And yet I did feel in these tiny little threads that were in there, some semblance of what you have just so vulnerably shared. And I agree with you. I'm a memoirist. I believe in being true about our life experiences to the extent we can bear to tell the truth of who we are and what we've done, to help other humans feel less alone. I would like to turn, we have about another 10 minutes for our conversation before we pivot to questions from our amazing audience of over 80 people. I want to give a shout out to Mary O'Malley, who's saying, congrats, Anna. You never cease to amaze me. And to Darrell Coleman. So much love for you, Anna. So wonderful to know that you have I have so many supporters here on this, debut of your book tour. It's just great for all of you who are here. We thank you.
Thank
Let's
you so
turn
much.
to our
Yeah.
present moment. Can we get into our American moment for a
Yeah.
moment? Is that okay?
Yes.
So, I have been increasingly worried since Barack Obama became viable as the nominee for the Democratic Party in 2008. I, as a Black woman, have been concerned about the rise of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
I began writing poetry about it in 2012 and delivering this sort of spoken word out loud in public spaces then. And because I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't ignore that they were buying more guns. I couldn't ignore that they were joining hate groups in record numbers. I couldn't ignore that they were increasingly taking the lives of Black grown-ups and children and going unpunished.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sort of, annoyed by those who have just discovered with the murder of George Floyd that this happens to Black people, but bless them for now having their eyes open. But you also have not ignored the experience of Black people in this country. You are deeply aware, as you've already explained, aware of what we endure and experience. I found myself laden with fear as the election was coming. I had been saying for years, whether he's impeached out, term limited out, or voted out, they are coming. Let's make no mistake, they're coming. This band of angry white folks who are armed and feel this is a white country and whose narrative about the self rests upon the subjugation of us, they're coming. Let's make no mistake. And I realized I've been waiting and waiting and waiting. And I spoke to my niece, Sade Lythcott, who is the director of the National Black Theater, which is located in Harlem, New York, on 125th and 5th. I said, she's my niece. She's 10 years younger than me. I said, Sade, I'm so worried. I'm terrified. And she held me over the phone and she said, Julie, I know you're a caring person. I know you're worried about people you don't even know losing their lives. And I said, yes. She said, but let me suggest that these fears are rooted in our oppression. And let me ask you to consider reframing it. Root your concerns in our liberation. And there was something about that advice that was so exquisite. I said, that's it, Sade, that's it. I can still care about people, not from a place of oppression, but from a place of liberation. And I think your book somehow, because you began writing it years ago, right? Here you are with this book about three mothers who lived decades ago, whose famous sons are long since dead. Yet you've written a book that somehow speaks precisely to this moment where Stacey Abrams has been the mother of Georgia and, maybe the mother of America in bringing us to this moment, and the mother of, to Kamala Harris in her amazing ascension to this role. Like, somehow your book just speaks to that.
Absolutely.
Let me shut up now and just lay that at your feet and say, what do you make of that, of this moment and your book and your foresight? I mean, what do you hope? How can this book help us in this moment stay grounded in our liberation?
I love Sade's words. Those are incredibly inspiring. I'm going to hold those with me as well. I appreciate you sharing them. This book really showcases that the connection, again, not only of the mothers to their sons, but the mothers to us and where we are today. So much of what happens in our country is a result of historic amnesia. People feeling surprised and shocked by white supremacist behavior. On the day of the Capitol riot, so many people were texting me like, what do you make of this? Like, whoa, are you okay? This must be so scary. No, this is not surprising at all. This is 100% to be expected. This is what white supremacists do. They throw tantrums. This happens even if they lose a football game, they want to burn things. The only thing that was unprecedented was the fact that it was the Capitol and it was a different building. But even when I think about these mothers and the years that I've spent documenting their lives and thinking of what they live to see, it forces you to focus so much more on progress and so much more on just thinking about the truth of the country. And the only way that we can heal, the only way we can find unity is through acknowledging the truth and finding justice and making sure we're fixing mistakes rather than pretending that this is quote unquote not America or that this is new behavior that we should be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid. This is what they've been doing all along. You know, I think more people need to read books, like White Rage by Carol Anderson. A lot of Black feminist scholars have books out about American history that shows really clearly these responses being consistent with the progress of marginalized groups, but that not stopping us. And so when I think about Alberta Burtis and Louise, they lived through race riots. Alberta was only like 3 years old when the Atlanta race riots happened on Sweet Auburn Avenue, and white supremacists came in and just broke buildings and killed Black people and just wanted to end the fact that there was a rising Black middle class. This is the same community through which we have our newest senator from Atlanta, Georgia. So this connection between history is not a stretch, it's not disjointed, it's a continuation of what we have been fighting for years and that we're going to continue to fight now. All three of them lived to see the Great Depression, each world war. They lived again through the civil rights movement. They participated in all of this. And so we're continuing a legacy that they passed on to us. We need to focus on the truth of the country, but also on the hope that we are moving closer to Black women's vision of what can be possible in a country that for so long told us that our lives and our children's lives were not worth dignity, had no value, were not worth even seeing as human lives. But we've always known that that is not true. And therefore, how have we pushed the country to see things through our eyes and helped progress the nation in a way where everybody's humanity can be acknowledged, that our children's humanity can be acknowledged, our humanity as Black women can be acknowledged. And I think the book comes out at a time that I couldn't have chosen a better time. More people in America are finally realizing, oh, okay, maybe we should start listening to Black women. Like, ooh, fascinating. Kamala Harris's story is so inspiring. Stacey Abrams and all the many other Black women in Georgia who made this happen are inspiring. How have they been doing this? And how long have they been doing this for? The answer is the beginning of slavery in the United States of America. Black women have continued to progress the country forward. And now's a time, if you want to start learning more about us, there's several books out there, and mine is just one of them. But I do hope that it helps to contribute to a conversation that makes our country, we see our history much more clearly, and we also see where we're going and our future. And then the final thing I'll say is so many people focused on that riot that day. But what was most exciting that day was what happened in Georgia and what Black women did in Georgia. And I refused for all of my focus to be on something white supremacists tend to do. What I wanted to focus more on was the historic moment that Black women brought.
Absolutely. As a reminder, we're talking about The Three Mothers by Anna Malaika Tubbs, her debut book. I presume that more books are coming and you'll have an opportunity to tell us that. You want to buy this book, people. You want to read this book, not just because it's about to be Black History Month, but because this is a very significant contribution to our understanding of America, to our understanding of ourselves. I want to say that I've recently, in the last 5 years, learned, I say 5 years is recent for me because I'm so old. For you, it's like,
that's recent.
Mayor Joe Riley, the former mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, white man, I believe he was reelected 10 times. He was called Black Joe by a lot of white folks in Charleston because he was so friendly with the Black community. I heard Mayor Joe years ago say that Charleston is the harbor town through which 1 in 2 African slaves entered America. Mayor Joe said, like it or not, Charleston's harbor is the Ellis Island for everyone here who descended from African slaves. And they are building a museum. I want everybody to know this. They're building a museum I can't remember the exact name off the top of my head, but there is a museum opening in about 14 months on the harbor in Charleston, honoring the African slaves who came and their descendants, of which I am proud to be one. And I
Wow.
think I'm raising this because your point about how we have been made to feel about ourselves as African Americans, as Black people over the centuries, we've been made to feel degraded, unworthy, that we do not deserve dignity. That's been the heaping load of this white supremacist ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And we have always tried to get out from under that and be strong within our families and in our communities and in our churches and our clubs and our work. This 21st century is a time when we are being increasingly heard in these ways, and you are majorly contributing to that. We are learning that it is okay to admit, I've been ashamed. You know, that my memoir goes there. I was this Black kid growing up in white spaces, ashamed to be Black because America was teaching me to be ashamed.
Mm.
And I'm thrilled to have done the work in my adulthood to get out from under that shame and locate a Black self I can love. And I think your book contributes as we learn more and more about ourselves and who we are and how strong we've been and that we matter. Each of us can have a very personal experience around a strengthening of the spirit, a strengthening of the sense of self-love and our right to be here. So I want to ask you as my final question, and then we're turning. I know I'm getting notes like, hey, a nice short answer. They're like, what did you learn about yourself as a Black woman, as a Black mother, as Anna Malaika Tubbs? What did you learn about yourself as you were putting so exquisitely these stories of three other people on the page?
Oh gosh, I'll try to keep that pity. Every time I read a draft of this book, and well, now it's the final draft, but I learned something new about myself. I truly did. The stands out the most to me in my most recent read, though, is the importance of the humanity and how we show our humanity to our loved ones. That it's not about seeming like these superhumans or superheroes with these powers to withhold more pain than other people or to hold more on our shoulders than other people can, which is something that so often people, give to Black women. Like we talk about Black women who have lost their children to gun violence in America, to police violence. We talk about mass incarceration. We're constantly like, they're just so powerful. They're just so strong. But these three women really taught me the importance of showing who they were as human beings, that also meant that it was painful for them, that their hearts were broken, that when their sons were killed and when James Baldwin passed away later, but still before his own mother did, it hurt them. They cried deeply. And that is what helped them to be the inspirations for. It wasn't that they were not human. It wasn't that they were human. And being able to show that in my own life with my husband and teaching my son that matters for us to be able to inspire those around us. I think that their sons had such a deep connection to the human experience because they saw and witnessed their mother's willingness to be human in front of them. Hopefully that makes sense, but it's something I've been carrying with me a lot lately.
It sure does. Thank you for that. Okay, Nia, I'm turning it back over to you. I think you're going to march us through the questions that are coming in.
Wow, I just want to say thank you both for that conversation. I'm just feeling so inspired and encouraged to hear both of your words. And I think you've touched on so many important topics relevant for now, but also recognizing the history that we're living through. So we do have questions from the audience that I'm excited to get into. And again, for folks, as questions come up, please do put them in the Q&A for us and we'll have those addressed. So to start, we have a question here from Elizabeth, and she's asking you, Anna, how did you choose these three mothers to focus on? I'm sure there were many other mothers that you could have considered, but how did you pick these three?
There were definitely so many other mothers, and I was having a really hard time actually narrowing them down. But I thought about men who were often put in conversation with each other. Of course, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X are so often kind of put and represented incorrectly as polar opposites, but everyone kind of talks about them together. And more recently, more people are talking about James Baldwin with the I Am Not Your Negro film based on his writing, and when he states that he was a witness to his friend's work when he speaks about ML Malcolm X, as well as Medgar Evers. And so I actually also did look into Medgar Evers' mother. The reason I ended up choosing these three was because all of the moms were born within 6 years of each other. And then all of their famous sons were born within 5 years of each other, which was really cool in terms of a chronology. One of my strengths, I think, in writing and generally in the way I think as I make connections between things that are so different and that represent really beautiful diversity. But then there's moments in the book where they kind of intersect and they don't even realize that they're intersecting with each other. And that just really kind of lit a fire within me. And I felt that the three of them brought a beautiful kind of symbol of the diversity of Black womanhood in America, that we were all so different from each other. There were things in which and ways in which we definitely intersected, and we had some similarities in the ways we were treated in the United States as Black women. But I wanted to celebrate our diversity and our differences and the strength that brought our community. And the three of them showed that in a really beautiful way, while also allowing me to make some points about history and chronology and how that was affecting them based off of their own access to resources and their own families and backgrounds.
That's excellent. And I feel like you've so beautifully woven together all of their narratives.
Thank you.
They're like perfectly in conversation.
Thank you so much.
So we have another question here from Latina, and they're saying that they're not a writer, but they're 82 years old and their life has had so many stories. And they're saying they know you encourage women to write their own stories. So how would you recommend they get started?
I love that question. I talk about in the book, actually, one of the takeaways is I want more Black women to write their stories, more people to write their stories, because especially for marginalized communities, other people, and Audre Lorde always talked about this, will define us for us if we do not define ourselves. And a huge part of that is keeping record of our lives. Today, more than ever, there's all these ways in which we can keep record of our lives that Alberta, Burtis, and Louise did not have access to. You know, whether that's social media or, you know, writing letters to your family members that they have, you know, a concrete thing that they can hold on to, or just letting people know how it is that you made it to where you are today and where you're going and what you care about. I think especially when I think about mothers, and not only when I say mothers, I don't say only like biological mothers. I'm talking about people who do mother work, something that Patricia Hill Collins talks about, this caring for others and what that means and how we value that kind of feminine work of care and love and bringing other people along with us, etc. But writing about why that matters to you and who you are as an individual and what your dreams and aspirations are, that can be so huge for not only your children, but any student that wants to kind of be a sponge to your own experiences. So however they want to start, I think is beautiful, whether that's just journaling, whether that's starting a blog. But again, there's never been a time where there were so many opportunities to write our stories down. And I just encourage that to be from a perspective of honesty and vulnerability, where we don't feel we have to be a certain image, but that we're just being ourselves and exploring how that self changes throughout our life.
If I could just add briefly as a memoirist, just to Martina, I've actually pulled together with colleagues at the Grotto something called Writing Memoir, which you can find online, but I have in there an essay that talks about, you know, how you kind of get started. And what I just want to say quickly is the stories that are burning most in you that make you say, I think I want to write those down. Yeah. Don't worry about how they relate to the other stories. Don't worry about what's missing in between the stories. Don't worry about how you're going to get into the stories. Just write the stuff that is knocking at the door of your consciousness saying, tell me, tell me, tell me, tell me. Write those things down. They will probably become the most important, meaningful bits of whatever the broader work you write becomes.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think even what you were saying earlier about how hard it was to find certain history or who even gets to write history, that really speaks to the importance of documenting our own. And someone actually has a question here about like how difficult it was to get an accurate history or representation for each of these women. If you could go into that a little bit more.
It was extremely difficult. Each fact in the book, I mean, even each paragraph required, like every sentence was like from a different source. So I'm really proud of how beautifully it reads, but it was difficult. It was like, piecing all these puzzle pieces together that were totally scattered. But it also allowed me to really appreciate the complexity of the women's lives and kind of, I'm a broken record, but it spoke to the humanity of the women, that these were not necessarily like clean cut stories, and none of our lives are, that we live with conflicts even in our own decisions that we might have made at one point and that we made later on in our lives. So my main objective was to challenge anything that I could tell was definitely through a male lens, male gaze, especially a white male gaze, that was, representing these women in a way that I felt probably was not accurate. So for example, there are these letters that we have from when Louise Little was institutionalized at the Kalamazoo Mental Hospital in Michigan. And her time there, she's there for 25 years of her life against her will, taken away from her children taken away from her. And the only real record we have is what the state writes to each other about what they feel her condition is. And the man who's instrumental in making sure she goes there is a white psychiatrist who says that she's imagining being discriminated against and diagnoses her with dementia praecox. Those are those moments where you're like, what? How dare you say that a woman who was an immigrant woman, single woman, her husband had been murdered, she's trying to raise her 8 children alone, and she's an activist, very outspoken, very proud, is imagining being discriminated against. And so you have to think, how often are these records being kept about our lives that are just completely wrong, completely out of context, completely not taking account our experiences as Black women. So that's just an example, and that actually came up a lot with all 3 of them, that like something would be mentioned, but it clearly wasn't really, I guess it just didn't understand, like it didn't have the context that it needed to be placed within what I would say was their like, and adding, my own perspective to that, but also then looking through other Black feminist writings on interpreting in that example, for instance, how many times Black women were misdiagnosed when it came to mental illness, for instance.
Right, that's absolutely so true. So I have another question. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. So you did mention earlier that you were working on this book prior to being a mother. And so we have a question asking about what inspired you to focus on mothers prior to your own motherhood journey. And perhaps maybe you could also share if there's any other authors that have inspired you to write this book.
Yes, definitely. She is a white woman, so it's not a Black mother, but her own journey and path to her goals and what she wanted to become as this international lawyer, coming from this small town of Walla Walla, Washington, where people didn't believe that women should, go on to these careers, etc. So from the beginning of my life, I have been taught by this incredibly strong woman. And she also always told me that I needed to appreciate everything that she did for me and my siblings, that it wasn't something we could take for granted. It was actually quite funny. She would always say, you have to say thank you for that. I didn't have to do that just because I'm your mom, kind of thing. And so it just made me pay more attention to like the effort that she was putting in and day out to like be my mom, and what that mattered and why that mattered, and why her own aspirations still mattered, that she was like still this human being. And so I always think about moms. I'm always thinking about the stories that are kind of being kept in the shadows, that people aren't paying enough attention to. When I went into the program, I wasn't quite as aware of how personal this project was for me, even before becoming a mom, but I was definitely responding to the erasure I was facing on a daily basis in my own life. And I felt like if I could do something to like highlight other women's stories, that in some way later I realized that it was kind of helping me as well. So was there a second part of that question? Did I forget it?
Yeah, it was also whether there were other authors that inspired you to write your book.
Yeah, I'm inspired by several. I mean, I talked about Margaret Lee Shetterly, of course, and Isabel Wilkerson. I'm also incredibly inspired by Brittany Cooper. Her ability to really dominate academia, but also have writing that's accessible and interesting, opens so many paths for me, because when you're writing a sociology dissertation, you have to say why you are using these methods and why it is okay to maybe make the work more understandable and accessible. So when you have academics who have already done that very successfully, it opens doors for the rest of us to be able to as well. So definitely Brittany Cooper. Joan Morgan, who wrote When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, about, hip hop feminism, was a mentor of mine. She came and did like a kind of one quarter lecture at Stanford, and I just was like so in love with her and the notion of Black feminism that I previously was not quite as well aware of. So she definitely set me on my path there. So several authors, Black women who were just, I guess, again, I'm a broken record, but were truthful and were bringing themselves to their work. And it was something I could do and something that I loved and felt inspired by. And I could be one of those authors. It just blew me. Now with the book coming out, it's crazy to me that another Black woman will hold my book and hopefully feel inspired by what I was able to accomplish. And I'm following a grand legacy of other women that I'm so honored to join.
So much, Anna. We have just a wealth of questions. People are so curious to know. I'm going to close with just one final question because it's something I'm curious about as well. And then we would love to give you a few moments to actually read from the book.
Oh, yes.
So someone is asking that they're sure the families are probably immensely grateful that you are helping them discover or, sharing the stories of these mothers. And so they're wondering if you've helped them actually discover new features of their own family history, or if you've connected with them aspects of their past that they might not previously have known about.
Wow. The journey of getting to know the families has also been incredible. But I will say that at the beginning, they were very reserved. All three families did not really want to talk to me about it. And I think I was naive going into it. I was like, they're going to want to talk about these mothers. I'm going to have so many interviews with living relatives and, friends who are still alive. I was so excited about this. But when I had realized this response that they were, invested in protecting these women, because all three of these families had been, I would say, hurt by academics in the past. They have been under immense scrutiny their entire lives because of the famous men. And so much that's been written has been much more concerned with exposing some kind of scandal or, giving a new angle that may be demeaning actually to the men and to the families. And we forget that they're human beings with loved ones who are still alive. So often we speak about them in these ways that they're just like subjects to us. And I mean, that's a part of being a public figure in history. And I mean, my husband and I have experienced that. When you're a public person, you deal with the scrutiny and you deal with the comments. But it made it really difficult actually to connect with them at first. And so there are still some family members that didn't want to speak to me about it. I think that they were waiting to see what the product was going to be. And it's been really cool to see their support since. And I really had to earn that trust. And I'm grateful that they pushed me to have to earn it. And I don't take it for granted that they were very willing. And so in terms of teaching them anything new, there were a few things, like we didn't necessarily know that Bertus's mother had passed away from a pulmonary hemorrhage around the time that Bertus was born. So even having this kind of like emotional connection to understanding that she might have passed away in relationship to Bertus's birth gives you a deeper appreciation for Bertus and what she was able to live through and why she was still able to see love and find hope in any kind of situation. But they all were just appreciative that people we're going to learn their stories, and we're going to focus on the family around the three men. I can only imagine what their lives have been like, constantly having to talk about these three men. And they are like, no, we also matter. Our families matter. And they were just a part of a legacy, just like we are. So that was cool to honor that for them as well.
Thank you. I mean, that's so interesting. And just, there is so much more to the story than what we're taught in history books and what we see. And so this book
Always.
is so important. And so I really encourage everyone to read the book. I know there's more questions about like the specifics of these women and the incredible lives they've led. So please do order the book, and really learn about this history that's so important. So with that, I would love to pass it off to you, Anna, to read from the book itself.
Oh, this is so special. Okay, I'm so excited. All right. This is from the introductory chapter. When I began writing this book, I wondered what it would be like if I could sit down with Bertus, Louise, and Alberta. I wondered what they were like before they became mothers, what their dreams were, what they cared about, whom they were friends with. I wondered what I would look for if I could follow them for a few days, if I could learn what inspired them and what scared them. I thought to myself, if I could sit down with these three mothers, what would I ask them? I realized I would want to know how they pushed themselves to keep going, even when various factors tried to stop them in their tracks. How Louise held on to her courage, even when her husband was killed. How Bertus stood up to her husband, even when he was abusive. How Alberta saw hope, even after her sons died. I would want to know what advice they would give us after witnessing some of the most transformative moments in American history, and after seeing progress come and go. In the absence of being able to speak with them directly, I am consoled by my ability to study them, write about them, and share their stories. It is time that the world knows their names. A little teaser.
That was so gorgeous.
Yes,
So
it
beautiful.
was. It was. Yeah, it is. It is. And as everybody has been saying throughout, it's so important to avail yourselves of this book. It's very, very special on so many different levels. It's great any time of the year, but what a fabulous way to kind of kick off Black History Month when so many people are thinking about it. I want to thank our guest and our host, Julie. You know, I've been involved with several events with Julie. She never disappoints, and today was no exception. And thank you for shepherding this conversation and bringing out the important aspects of the book and the social ramifications, everything, making it about the past, but also about our present. And thank you, Anna, so much for writing this book and letting us share in your vision and your talent. And I'm sure it's your debut, but I'm sure it's the first of many books. We will be hearing from you for many, many years to come. So, and I would be remiss not to go through all the thanks of different acronyms now, because I have to thank MOAD and Nia and the collaboration with Kaliba, Calvin and Anne, and the two mosaic arms of Kaliba. Thank you so much. This is kind of a debut for them. It's great that they chose the first event to be with a debut author, because this is their first event too. And I think it was a great collaboration. Also hoping that this will be the first of many collaborations between Kaliba and MOAD. And I want to encourage people to buy the book, and we're kind of uplifting certain bookstores like Underground of Sacramento. These are BIPOC bookstores, Salt Eaters, Cafe Con Libros, and also at MOAD. And obviously, if you're going to bookstores in person, you know, just obviously check out, we want to support independent bookstores. Certainly BIPOC, female-owned bookstores are top on our radar. But so we do encourage you to support the independent bookstore community, in addition to the stores I just mentioned. And so on that note, with all these thanks and good cheer, middle of the week, Wednesday, hump day, thank you everybody for coming, to our audience, your great questions, and just your participation.
Thank you all so much.
Congrats, Anna. Good luck.
Yes.
May the rest of the tour feel as supportive. I mean, the chat here, you haven't been able to look at it, but the chat has been magnificent, and this book is on its way, and I think we're all honored to get to be a tiny piece of it. So keep going.
Thank you. You guys got us off to such an incredible start.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us, everyone. Great to have such a huge group of people, whether you're whatever time zone you're in. We had some people here from England watching.
I think that was my uncle. That's so exciting. He said it was going to be too late for him, and I was like, old man, you ready to stay up to watch this?
All right.
I'm just going to stay on to read the chat, so I'll just turn off my video.
Sign off because I've got a thing that started a few minutes ago. Great. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Julie.
Anna, everybody. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.